Alrighty. Well, welcome to another young adult seminar. It's not about the money. Hope you guys enjoyed the warm-up, that Jessie J classic song, just to get you thinking about all things money. Yeah, it's so good to see you guys here. Thank you for taking the time out of your week to be here. It's encouraging to see that you guys want to grow in your walk with God. You want to see what He has to say about different areas in your life, and especially about money. Yeah, it's a topic which I think we often don't chat about. We often spend it more easily than we talk about it. So tonight's going to be a great chance for us to be reminded of what the world says about money, but more importantly, what God says about money, and what that might mean for us. Yeah, hearing what God has to say, how that might transform our pockets. We've got a panel up here of varying ages, stages. I don't know where I'm going with this, but why not introduce yourselves? Let's start here and work our way down. Can we get your full name? And if you had to choose a favorite coin in Australian currency, what would that coin be and why?
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Jen Flanagan, part of the 9 a.m. congregation. Favourite coin? Might have to say the $2 coin, because I think it might be the heaviest, and there was no $2 coin when I was in primary school.
I'll come to that.
Hi, I'm Anton. Full name?
Full name.
Anton Eduardo Marquez.
Ooh.
My favourite coin. We were getting our piano fixed, and the piano tuner found a 1 cent coin, which I hadn't found for a while. So again, a throwback for when I was young. So I'm going to 1 cent.
Hi, I'm Graham Harvey Boyd, and Harvey's making a bit of a comeback now for little kids, apparently, as a name. My favourite coin is the 5 cent coin, which no longer exists. I think it no longer. Does it really exist? That was the coin that I used the most as bridge toll back when there was a bridge toll for a motorbike, and had a little clip to hold the 5 cent coin. I think you could also put it in Christmas cakes or Christmas puddings.
I'm Elise Josephine Brush, and my favourite, I'm going $2 coin as well, but I really liked the specific $2 coins that had the Olympic rings on them, because then you could make the Olympic rings out of $2 coins, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Good mix. I feel like I'd go for the 50 cent. Just big surface area, a lot of edges.
Like your head?
Yeah, big surface area. All the heat comes out. Anyway, we're here to talk about all things money. You guys have sort of just introduced your age range, which has been quite entertaining to hear. You know, $2 coins, have they been around, have they not? What financial experience do you have? Do you have any? Do you have a lot? Do you want to share with us something along those lines?
Sure. My financial experience. So I'm an accountant, and I work as a forensic accountant. So I work for an accounting firm and a restructuring firm in the city called McGrath Nicol, and before that I worked for KPMG. Spent most of the past 20 years investigating fraud and other kinds of misconduct in the corporate environment. So people doing the wrong thing in the workplace, stealing money primarily, conflicts of interest, awarding contracts to people they know or people they're related to, manipulation of financial records and things like that. So that's where I've spent most of my time. Other financial experience, was a treasurer here at church for a number of years and had the pleasure of working alongside Graham Boyd when he was the church administrator, and now currently serving on the Arden School Council, so in the finance committee there and on the school council.
Don't have quite the same financial experience as you, Jen, but I have a commerce degree, so in another world I could have been a forensic accountant, but so got through that. My other financial experiences, I've been poor while I was at Bible college. I've been comfortable while I've had a full salary, and my parents were financial planners, so I've kind of absorbed a lot as well.
I think my financial experience is partly that I've had about 50 years of essentially business employment and a commerce degree to get it started. Did you major in marketing?
No.
No. Okay.
Economics.
So a range of marketing and sales type jobs, which generally speaking had a financial aspect to them. I was self-employed for 7 years with my wife. We started a business and we ran it successfully for 7 years. And then, as Jen mentioned, I was the administrator here for 14 years, and there was a financial aspect to that. I've also been the director of a bank, that being Bendigo Bank in Epping, where I was a director for 10 years.
I have no commerce degree and no formal experience in finance, so hopefully I'm a little bit of a relatable voice for anyone else out here who doesn't really know what they're talking about when it comes to money. I work full-time, so I do have a full-time salary. I've directed a beach mission for a few years, which does involve a bit of finance as well. I own a house. That's kind of cool. But yeah, I do not have any formal education. That's why I went at the end.
Yeah, so quite the range of experiences, which is going to be helpful because we are all young adults, but we also all have different stages that we're at. Some of you might be working full-time and income's coming in well. Some of you might be on struggle street with money. So it's great to have this range of experience with us. We're going to get stuck in, but before we do, now that we know the panel, it is not going to the next one. Someone please help me out. There we go. Alrighty. Tonight isn't all just about you guys listening. It is also about you guys having the chance to engage, to ask questions, to poke and prod at this panel here and see what they have to say on a bunch of different things. Q&A number is up there. Send the questions through. I'll do my best to filter whatever comes in through. And there'll be 2 opportunities for Q&A, so don't fear if you miss the first one. There will be another towards the end of the night. There'll also be a break in the middle just so you can get your drinks and take a bit of a break. But what the night's going to look like is we're going to go... how did that hair get there? We're going to go through a few different key ideas. We're going to look at, firstly, what the world says about money. Because if we're to hear what God has to say about money, we need to see what the world says and what the world believes, because we're part of an upside-down kingdom with a God who pushes against the tide of this world. So that's going to be helpful for us to start with. Then we're going to look at what God says, and then we're going to look at what can I do? What are some things that are going to be godly things for me to do in light of what the Bible says about money, in light of what God says about money and his attitude towards that. So yeah, looking forward to that with the Q&A sprinkled through. But firstly for you guys, it'd be great for you to chat at your tables and share, like, amongst your tables, what does the world say about money? If I was to ask you what the world says about money, what's like the first thing that comes into your mind? Chat amongst the tables, and I'll come around and pick on a few brave people and we'll see what we come up with.
Is there anything else? Yeah.
Just to see how many people give.
Be happy.
I'll probably look it up.
I love that no one stopped me. I tried to tempt me.
Alrighty. Sounds like good conversation at most tables. I'm going to come to the quiet table first. Have you guys got one thing that the world says about money? Adam, he's up. New administrator.
Your self-worth is correlated with your net worth.
Self-worth correlated with net worth. Big language. I like it. What about this table?
You can never have too much.
Ooh, you can never have too much. So self-worth, no such thing as too much. I like it. This table, who wants to volunteer? I'm going to go to...
Okay. Money is our source of security.
Sense of security. I like it. This table, what have we got?
It shows how blessed you are.
Ooh, actually, I want a bit more on that.
People think that people with more money are blessed, not just like in their situation in life. Yeah.
Cool. I like it. And final table, what have we got? Tom.
Selfishness is encouraged.
Selfishness is encouraged. So self-worth, security, selfishness, blessing. I think what the world says, I think we'd all agree on this panel, is a pretty easy one for us to agree on. In terms of, like, we live in it. We easily fall into those paths of it. Would you guys have anything to add on top of that, or anything to push back on, anything you agree with?
I completely agree with what everyone said. I think we are constantly told that, like, especially as young adults, like, you look around at the media, you're always getting told, like, you need to get a high-paying job because then you can get lots of money, you can spend lots of money, you can do things that make you happy because you have the money to do that. And we're just taught to be, like, consuming and spending the money. We're not really taught about giving or being generous. Like, that's something that happens rarely, and so when it happens, everyone's like, whoa, they were so generous. But, like, that shouldn't be the attitude we have. Like, it shouldn't be a one-off thing that someone donates a whole lot of money and we're like, wow, they're just amazing because they were so generous this one time. So yeah, I do think what you guys said about we're taught to be selfish, we're taught that, like, our money is our self-worth is very true.
Anything to add?
I've got a question to ask.
Ooh.
Is the idea of deferred gratification, in other words, possibly saving rather than consuming, is that a very old-fashioned, dead idea?
We've had a no and a maybe from the crowd.
Graham, what do you mean by deferred gratification for those who might be a bit
So
confused?
I guess it's I'm asking, the question is, with whatever money you have, whether it's a little or a lot, is part of the current view that you need to spend all that you have to get the benefits of that money now, buying what you want, living the way you want, rather than perhaps buying less than you want with a view to doing other things with it in the future.
Yeah. So there's that idea that, I don't know, I think it's especially for young adults where everything's on hand, like you can get things instantly. Why not spend? Why not, go express post on that delivery? Why not use other methods of like afterpay and that to get things, then wait? Yeah. Jen, you work as a forensic accountant. You see people at their worst with spending. Is there anything that you've seen from your life with that?
Yeah, I think the group that said selfishness, I think that really comes through in the work that I do. So a lot of the times people who are doing the wrong thing in the workplace, it's driven by greed. In some cases it's driven by selfishness, the desire to get ahead, the desire to step up in the organisation, get the next promotion, be seen to be the person that's the rainmaker or kicking goals in terms of their career and all those kind of things. But I think the thing for me when I first started working in this space is just being reminded of everybody's sinful nature, I guess, in terms of putting yourself first, being greedy, often at the expense of others, at the expense of other organisations, other people in the organisation that haven't done anything wrong. So that's the type of thing that I come across quite regularly, day to day, when we're conducting investigations.
And one thing that I think that raises is we're good at getting instant gratification. We're good at spending. I think we can all agree on that. But then there comes a pressure of income. I don't know, what does the world say about income? Because I think that comes under money. And what does the world say about money? Have you guys got thoughts on how the world plays into that?
Are you meaning not just spending money, but earning money?
Yeah, earning money, like side hustles, gambling, working, the pressure to work full time, anything along those lines.
Yeah, I can talk to the pressure to work full time. So I've been really fortunate since having kids. I've been able to work part time. That's not that prevalent in the industry that I work. Often women will come back to work and work full time or 4 days a week. I've probably experienced that implied pressure of I'm still working 3 days a week even though my children are both at school now. There is always that implied pressure. I've never been asked directly, but everyone else is working full time or nearly full time. Why aren't you doing the same? Why aren't you trying to earn as much money as you can? That kind of thing. And I think that's definitely prevalent in our sector. Not sure as much in other sectors, but there really is that pressure from society to be earning as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and perhaps then not being able to focus on other things in your life. And there's no issue with women working full time, but there may be other priorities in life at certain stages in your life that you choose to do something different. And that's not all that common in the area that I work. It's been my observation.
Yeah, and Elise, you're the voice of the young adults. I don't know, what is like speaking into that income and how money comes in? Have you got anything to add on top of that?
I think one thing that I see as quite prevalent around is people having like multiple jobs or multiple sources of income. If you're working full time, it's like not unusual for you to have a side hustle going on. So you might have another business or you might work another job on the side, just because we all seem to really enjoy the idea of just being really busy and being overworked. Even though we say we hate it, it's hard for us to stop doing it because we're like, well, if I stop and I don't work that extra shift or I don't have that extra job on the side, I'm not going to get enough money to do X, Y, Z things that I want to do. And we kind of get into a nasty cycle of, well, I need to be busy so I can keep earning money, so I can keep doing these things that I want. rather than taking a step back and being like, well, no, my time is valuable. How can I be valuing what I can bring to the table, not just the money that I can bring in?
And Anton, you pushed back on that a few Sundays ago when you were speaking about Sabbath, in terms of we are busy people. We love to be busy. We think it's like the definition of success in a way. Like, if you're busy, that is good. But you also showed us that the Bible pushes back on that. So we sort of looked at what the world says about money. I think we all get it. None of it's refreshing. It's all draining. It's all a burden when we dig beneath the surface. Anton, do you want to start and open up this what God says to us about money?
Yeah, sure. Just on the busyness thing, it just shows what we hold as valuable as a society. If we're constantly busy, then there's a busyness, but then also the money that comes from that busyness. If that's what we value, we're just going to keep on going for that, whereas we don't see rest as valuable anymore. But yeah, we'll turn to the Bible. For me, since hearing about the seminar, I've reflected on two things that have happened in my life in terms of thinking about money and my experience. So a few weeks ago, I went, so some friends of ours invited us and 4 other families to this big house which they hired out for a week, and they had different groups staying in it through the week. And it's for our friend's 40th birthday, and so we had a lovely time in the Hunter Valley with them. But there was me and another minister couple there, and we were like, how, to add up how much that week cost them, it was like, whew, that's quite a lot. And so for both of us, it kind of made us go, wow, should we, like, that's a life that we could have, if I went on with my commerce degree or did something, that I could have had, and whether, that was a kind of a pull for me. Second thing was, my wife Katie has just gone back into the workforce after raising kids for 12 years. And with that, of course, has meant extra income for us as a family. And my immediate thought was, okay, what can we do with that money? What do we put it towards, a holiday or kids' activities, or save it up? And so in both those things, that really made me go, wow, what's in my heart? Because the first thing, looking at my friends and how, what they can afford, is like, assuming that I should be earning as much as other people. That was kind of my false assumption there. And how I reacted to Katie starting work and the money that we're getting, it's like, okay, the money that you earn is ours, and therefore we can do what we want with it. And so heading to the Bible was really challenging for me to go, okay, what does God actually think about money and how we use it? And so hopefully a little tool through the Bible will be refreshing. Thank you. So first thing that the Bible says is that God owns everything. God owns everything. It's all God's. And also, he has been really generous to us. So all that we have comes from God. You've got the term, he's a self-made man or she's a self-made woman. That's not true. They would have worked hard to get that reputation. But God is the one who's placed us in this country that has allowed us to work. Or God is the one who's given us our brains and minds and opportunities to think through things, and our health to be able to do things. God's the one who is over all, so that he's the one who gives us what we have, even if we work for it. And so we see in a passage like, it's going to be too small, like Genesis 1, which says, so God created mankind in his own image, and then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves along the ground. So there's our task. But also God says, I give every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. So there's God being generous. He's given us all the plants to eat, and later in the Bible gives us meat as well. And he gives us things in order that we steward what he gives us for the sake of, in Genesis, ruling the world, in having dominion over the world, using our world for our good purposes and God's good purpose. So everything that we have is actually a gift from God. So it's not my money is mine, I'll spend it. But it's my money is God's. And then we'll look at what we do with it in a little bit. So he's the one who provides for all of us. And look how well we have been provided for. I have not had a day where I've gone hungry. I've not had a day where I haven't had anywhere to live. What amazing provision God has blessed us with. Not the same for everyone, of course, in the world, but everything that we have is from the hand of God. And his generosity not only stops at financial or provisional generosity, he also, of course, has given us his Son. He's been so generous to us that he who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not, along with him, graciously give us all things, from Romans 8. So the biggest thing God has given us is his Son to die for our sins, to bring us in relationship with him, to set us right with the world around us. And so if he's given us his Son, he's going to give us his full support and all the more from there. Ephesians 1 says we have every spiritual blessing in Christ. God is a generous God. And so if we're made in his image, then generosity should be part of our nature. And so from God owning everything, the question kind of changes. So it's not, we think, okay, how much of my money should I give? But actually, no, how much of God's money should I keep for myself? It's kind of a different spin on that, to go, all right, if it's God's, all right, some should be for myself, but it's God's money. So I should not just think about myself, but others as well. So that's the first point. God owns everything, but he's been generous to us. And so the second thing, that if we know Jesus, if we know how generous God has been, then we should store up heavenly treasure. We should store up heavenly treasure. And so if you got a Bible, turn to Matthew 6. If I printed my notes out larger, I would just read them, but I can't. Matthew 6. I reckon it's later on than that. Thank you. Yes, Matthew 6. I'm going for 19. Thank you, Adam. You are correct. Oh, Dave. Sorry. There you are. Sorry. Hi. Any low frequencies? I'm not sure of. Okay. It says, I can almost read it on the screen. Sorry. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. That's completely countercultural. Every ad that you see is like, store up treasures for yourself on this earth. No, says Jesus. Because moths or vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. Can I add mold into that after this summer? But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So on that last, big point. Jesus saying, no, have the right perspective. Think about what true treasure is. It's not the things of this world, but actually heavenly treasure. Things that God will commend us for. It's good works or godly character, faith in Jesus, being loving to others. They're the things that we're to store up because God will commend us for them when we see him in heaven. But also in that last line, there where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Notice the order of that. So you might be thinking, okay, I need to get my heart right, because then when I feel like I want to give, that's when I should start giving. Whereas Jesus is saying, no, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So put your treasure where you want your heart to be. So like if you're generous with your money, even if your heart's not quite there, then your heart will follow. Your heart will follow where you put your money. So if you put your money into yourself or your family, just yourself, then that's where your heart will go. It will focus on itself. And so we get all the selfishness that we've already mentioned. But if your treasure is elsewhere and you give money away, then, so if you put your treasure elsewhere, I should say, then your heart will follow that instead. The passage goes on to say, you cannot serve both God and money. And so therefore God and money both demand worship. Both demand worship. And so you need to choose. The pursuit of wealth rivals Jesus's priorities. So it's one or the other. If you, as we'll see later, if you love money, if you pursue it, it's okay to, get it. But if that's your desire, then it's going to demand your worship. It's going to take all of you. Whereas Jesus, of course, calls us to follow him. And so then, as we store up heavenly, so if we store up heavenly treasure, then your heart will follow your money. And then, what are we to? Do you want to jump in? You're right. What are we to use God's money to do? What's it for? And ignore the little tagline there. I forgot to get rid of that. If God's given us money, and He'll, over the course of our lives, if it's not just for ourselves, what's it for? Well, firstly, it's to build God's kingdom. Through the New Testament, we see people using what they have to support those who, or to help people hear the gospel. So Paul talks about how he and the apostles are supported by the support of other churches. Or in Philippians, he commends them for their partnership in the gospel, including their financial partnership. And so if we are to gain treasure in heaven, one of the greatest treasures that we'll have is seeing people come into the kingdom and grow in kingdom mindedness. And so, for that, I try and do this. My family tries to do this. We give to the church, so we give a portion of our income to All Saints because that's what God commends us to do. We also give money to CMS and support missionaries so that God's kingdom may grow overseas as well. So we do that in our family. The Bible also says, as well as use money to build God's kingdom, use money to provide for your family and your relatives. So 1 Timothy 5:8 says, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's pretty strong, 1 Timothy 5:8. So it's okay to earn for your family. That's partly what earning's for. It's so that you can provide for particularly those who are dependent on you. Now, for many of you guys, that's no one yet, but it's okay to think about, okay, maybe one day I'll get married, maybe one day I'll have a family. If I earn money now and save it, that might be a big help. So I was so thankful. So I never really, when I was at uni, I worked a bit, but I never really traveled. I wasn't into Apple products then, so I didn't have much to spend things on. But the saving I had from that was just so useful when I got married and started a family. That just really helped set us up so that we we weren't dependent on anyone. So it's okay to save, to provide for future dependents. We don't need to have enough to give our kids all that they want. So tension which you might have if and when you have kids is, I need to give my kids the best thing, must take them overseas, must give them the latest iPhone when they ask for it, no, we don't need to provide for them for everything that they want or everything that they could have, but provide for them. Make sure that they're fed have enough to get by and do things. And lastly, we need to give money to, particularly to provide for the poor. Plenty of places in the Bible. Galatians 2:10 says, all they asked, other Christians asked, was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I had been eager to do all along. So I was so encouraged coming to this church that we have a partnership with Compassion. What a wonderful way to express our care for the poor and financial care for the poor by sponsoring children in need. So it may be, through charity. It may be people near you who need a bit of extra money, or could do with an extra meal. I remember one time a guy at uni, kind of friends, not close friends. His house got burnt down because his brother was involved in drugs, and the drug lords came and burnt their family house down. And so I just bought him a jumper, nice jumper. I just bought him a jumper just to, provide a little bit for someone who's in need. Final thing for me is how much to give. Do we give everything? Do we give some? Do we give 10%? Let's have a think. Okay, you might have heard of tithing in the Old Testament. Anyone know what tithing is? 10%? 10% of everything? Thanks, Adam. I mean, I'm joking. I know it's your name. Ollie, what do you think? Did you ever thought, Ollie? Okay, yeah. So in the Old Testament, the first, 10% of all that you made. So if you grew apples, 10% of your apples went to what you were to give. If you grew cattle, 10% was to the Lord. Actually, your firstborn was dedicated to the Lord as well, and you had to buy him back. And so the Old Testament practice was to give a tenth of what you earned, particularly to the Levites, because they had no inheritance, they had no land, but they were there serving the Lord full time, so gave a tenth to them. It was actually a bit more, because they gave for festivals, they gave to the poor, and they gave to particular projects like the building of the temple. So it ended up being a bit more than 10% that the Old Testament people gave away. What is it for us as God's people this side of Jesus? Well, you might remember this a couple of weeks ago with the different laws, different ways the law interacts with the Old and New Testament. Does it just go straight through and yes, we should give a tenth now? Does it go back and no, we don't have to give a tenth? Or does it change and morph through into the New Testament? I think, do you want to lock one? Do you want to have a guess? 1, 2, or 3? Morph, which is 3. Correct. So give a tithe to God. I think it changes. Jesus doesn't mention tithing except to condemn the Pharisees for not doing it because they should have been keeping the law. But Jesus then, so he doesn't focus on the 10%, but he focuses on sacrificial generosity. Remember, he's the Lord he's the Lord of sacrificial generosity. He gave his own life for us. And so he'll commend the widow who gave just a couple of copper coins. He commends her because out of her poverty she gave so much, so sacrificially. And so for me, I go, well, surely, if the Pharisees gave 10% because they had to and they didn't love Jesus, surely Jesus wouldn't want us to give less than that. That's my thinking. So for us as a family, we give over 10% of our income to church and then CMS and Compassion and others on top of that. That's what we do. Last verse. So 1 Timothy 6 is just, read this every time you change jobs, or this just helps us get in perspective of what we should be thinking about with our wealth. I'm going to turn up because there's a box in the way. Says, what's the first verse up there? 6, thank you.
It says, godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out of it. If we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And a bit further on, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs.
Thank you, Graham. So, sorry, you go. Yeah. There might be more. So, contentment. If you follow Jesus, your great desire is contentment, not the pursuit of more. And you see the danger there, the risk. Love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money is not the root of all kinds of evil. Money is a good thing that God gives us. But loving money, desiring more, that's where evil comes in, and pierce themselves with many griefs, as your victims that you're investigating, I'm sure, have found out. And the next little bit says, command those who are rich, which is you. If you end up full-time on the dole, you're in the top 20% of the world's wealthiest people. If you earn the average income for an Australian, you are in the top 1% of the world's richest people. You're in the rich category. I'm in the rich category. So command those who are rich, says Paul to Timothy, not to be arrogant or put their hope in wealth. Not to hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. And in this way they'll lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation in this coming age, so they may take hold of the life that is truly life. The life of consuming, the life of spending, the life of rising up the ranks just to earn more money and have the status of a fancy car or whatever, that's not truly life. Truly life is contentment now, knowing of the wonderful inheritance that is to come when Jesus returns. That's a little bit about what the Bible says.
Thank you, Anton. I'd love for there to be more time to focus more on what God says. I think we easily jump into the practical of what do I do without being reminded of who we want to worship and what he says about money. The thing I noticed, especially in the purpose side, is this idea that he gives us a purpose and it's his commitment to us flourishing. It's his, like what God says about money, what we should do with money isn't him being a rule maker and being that, that strict teacher, but it's him knowing what is best for us to flourish, especially with wealth, especially with money. But we often think we know what's best. I think it is going to be time to move into Q&A, unless anyone had something desperate to add that they don't want to hold in. Silent. There we go. Well, there's been a few great questions which have come in. If we don't have time to answer it now, we'll try and get to it later on. The first one is a relevant local question. It has disappeared. Living in North Epping is expensive. Is it godly to spend our money on $2 million homes and lavish cars? How can we reconcile that when Christ himself was homeless without much money? I've noticed majority of the middle-aged bracket in our church owns a home, expensive cars, goes on expensive trips. I find it quite discouraging as I try to live for Jesus and he calls us to drop everything and follow him. There's a question in there somewhere. I guess it's that tension of we do live in quite a wealthy suburb where followers of Jesus do own homes and cars and go on trips. What's the balance? How do you reconcile the two? It's a tough question. Any thoughts?
Don't worry about comparing yourself to other Christians. So I remember having this exact same thought. Like someone when I was a young adult, someone bought a new car. I was like, oh, how could they buy a new car? And getting on, you go, oh, actually, sometimes it makes financial sense to buy a new car rather than an old car. Don't worry about what other people, comparing yourself to other people. And even, it's okay if people have different circumstances and different experiences and end up in different places. Focus on where you're at. And so, yes, you may not be, you may not conceive about how you can ever afford having a $2 million house, and maybe you'll never do that, and that's just how it goes. That's okay. How are you going at being content with what you have? How are you going at being wise and generous with what you're earning? Focus in on that. For me, so I used to minister in St Ives. There's even more wealthy people in St Ives. Probably the most generous people. I can think of two people who were the most generous people I think I've ever met. They're also two of the most wealthy people I've ever met. And so if you just saw their house or their car, you go, how can they be living for Jesus almost? But actually the amount that they gave away and the proportion of their wealth that they gave away is staggering. So don't judge people's hearts by their house size or car standard. Focus on your heart. Let God deal with their heart, and that seek contentment for yourself.
Can I jump in really quickly? That is something that I really struggled with when I went to visit our compassion centres in Tanzania, because growing up I grew up in Pennant Hills and then in North Epping. I come from a family that is quite wealthy. I own a home. I've got an income. I am in that top 1% of the world. Going and seeing people who you give them $48 a month for their kid to go to a program and get an education, and that means the world to them. That was something that I really struggled with. And I think what we've got to remember as well is that God has blessed us all in different ways. So the people in Tanzania are some of the most spiritually blessed people that I've ever seen. They are so, so on fire for God. And that is a way that God has blessed them. And we have been placed in this country in pretty wealthy situations, and that is how God has chosen to bless us in a way, and that's something that we can then pass on. That's a blessing we can give to other people. So it's not a bad thing to have money and to have a house and to have a car. But yeah, as Anton was saying, it is how you are then generous with the situation you are in that I think is really important.
And I don't think we should beat ourselves up according to our postcode. By and large, we live where we live probably because our parents lived there or lived nearby, and that's just the way it happened. So whether we live in North Epping or Coonabarabran or Dar es Salaam, we can't all live in East Africa. I think God is much more concerned by our motivation than by our geography. So where our heart is and what our desires are. So if I'm living here in my $2 million house, but I really wished I was living somewhere else in a $4 million house, and that was my goal to do that, then I think that's entirely the wrong motivation. It gets back a lot to that comment about godliness with contentment being great gain.
A question which sort of relates to that is, Graham, you said something helpful, which is like focus on your heart in terms of your generosity and your view on wealth. This question says, are we told to give our money to a point where we are uncomfortable? I feel in our society we are very lucky with our wealth. How much should we give? When should we stop? So if your heart's in the right place and you really, you feel that call, that desire to be generous, how far do you go? Is there such thing as going too far?
I think you've gone too far when you can't do what God has purposed you with money to do. So if you can't provide for your family, so if you have a family and you're giving so much money that your family can no longer afford a house, that's probably doing it to the detriment of your wealth. But if you are really feeling compelled to be generous, then that's an awesome thing, because that's something we don't see in our society. And if that is you, that is awesome and that is super encouraging. So don't try and shove that down because you're like, oh, I need to make sure I've saved X amount of money so I can do this and that and this in my life. If you are feeling that God is calling you to be generous in your current situation, then that is awesome. But there's a difference between being generous and being reckless with your money.
I think also it's important to note that you can be generous with your money, but there are other ways that you can be generous as well. So it can be volunteering or use of your time. So it doesn't always have to be buying things for people, giving cash to ministries and things like that. It could be making meals for people. It could be looking after people's kids. It could be taking older people to appointments. Those kind of things are still showing generosity and showing what's in your heart without actually having to have the financial means all the time.
Thank you for those questions. There's a few more that have come through which we'll get a chance to come to later. But for now, we're going to take a quick little drinks break, a good chance for you to come grab a drink, stretch. The panel are going to be here if you want to ask a quick question as well, if you have something more specific for a certain someone on the panel, but we'll try and get back to it in a few minutes. So meet back here in a few.
Excellent point, Jen. I love that you had a PowerPoint, Anton. You clicked the PowerPoint up and I was like, this is so Anton and I'm so here for it.
Oh, I got so blind. How are you reading that?
Well, I could read some of it, but yeah. So like I can read the 7 p.m, but I can't read the date.
I can read it's about the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh,
no, it's not about the money.
I wrote notes on my slides, which I normally don't do, but I did it tonight. But I printed the slides so small I can't read what's on the slides here. I can read my notes on the slides. So yeah. No, I just thought we're going to be talking a lot, so have something.
Yeah.
She is teaching 2 days a week at Arden. She's teaching Christian studies.
Do they seem more content or less stressed? Well, I think I'm right.
And when did that start?
Started the term, so about 7 or 8 weeks ago. Yeah.
My mom was so excited.
Oh yeah.
She's like, Katie, he's such a good asset. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And when Kate, she's told me this when we were shopping for carpet, but I forgot.
Oh right.
When she was a teacher,
Yes. She was an English teacher. Yes. Yeah. So she hasn't taught Christian studies before, but she's done some Christian study, and if you know how to teach, you can kind of pick up things.
So is it two full-time days?
So 2 full-time days, yeah. Of course, that means more on top of that, but yeah. So yeah. Yes. So it's big, like it makes life very full.
How are your girls finding it?
Lara's missing Katie a bit, so yeah. Thursday and Friday morning she goes fairly early. Thursday, Rosie Jocelyn picks them up and has them. Friday I have them for an hour before Katie gets home. So Lara's feeling it a bit. The others are okay, but yeah, because Lara's just used to Katie always being around.
I remember I had a bit of that when because my mum and I used to hang out all the time when the others were at school because I'm 4 years younger than Katrina, so I had mum all to myself, and then it was when I started going to preschool. I was like, oh, like I enjoyed being adopted, but I was never like the kind that just clung to her and never left her.
Yeah.
It's such a cool thing to be able to hang out with.
Yes, it is.
going to come back in 1 minute. So last minute questions, last minute drinks.
Apparently at the time, but she remembered it. She took it on, held it against her. Julie Mallison doing here.
She's a young adult Bible study leader. I was like, Julie, are you coming? Jen's too popular. Jen's too popular.
Wait, practical side. Ready for some pushback? It's my time to shine. Alrighty, we're gonna need Jen back up on the panel, table. You can chat to her after. She's not that scary. Alrighty. Well. We're gonna bring it back. We've looked at what the world says. We've looked at what God says. Ideally, we'd spend a lot more time on the things we have, but we don't have all night. I'd encourage you to keep coming back to wrestling with what God says about wealth and money and your life. Have that be the foundation you fall back to before you come to these practical things that we're about to talk about. Otherwise, it's just going to be a list of things that you think are going to be slightly helpful, rather than things that are going to be helping you live for God as a faithful servant of His. But we're going to go into the category of what can I do. So we're going to get heaps practical here. I'd encourage you to be thinking about what are some of these things that I can respond well with. And the first one is one that we've talked about a bit lately at church, and it's giving to church. There's a lot of wisdom around giving to church here. What have you guys got on giving to church? How can we do that in a way that worships God well?
I want to touch on what Jen said in the last question we had at the Q&A about the fact that there are different ways you can be generous. So financial generosity is a really good thing to be doing for church, and it's something that should be a priority with our money. But there will be different stages of your life where that's just not something that you can be super generous in that area. But you can be generous with your time. So you could be helping at Cornerstone. You could get to church early and do tech. You could be providing supper and not asking to be reimbursed for it. You could buy someone a meal. You could go for a walk with someone and give them your time. There are lots of other ways you can be generous that isn't just financial giving. But something that I would love to encourage you to do is just, if you haven't, sit down and have a look at what you're spending your money on, because you might be surprised at how much you spend without really thinking about it. So if you're someone who drinks a coffee and you spend $5 a day on a coffee, you could be spending $100+ a month on coffee. And that's something that you might be able to find a way to not do, and that's then money you could give to church or you could sponsor a kid with. It's something I did when I got back from Tanzania, because I sat down and was like, I spend so much money on things that I don't need to spend money on. One really good example was a gym membership. I would go to the gym and walk on the treadmill. I was like, why am I paying $60 a month to go walk on a treadmill when I can walk outside and it's free? So by not having a gym membership and walking outside, it meant I could sponsor another kid. And that was something that God really put on my heart, and that was a practical way that I could do something about what I was spending my money on.
Graham, you've seen and dealt with a lot of giving to church. What are some things that you have found that are going to be helpful for young adults to think about and wrestle with?
I think one of the most important things is to set aside your giving first rather than last. So rather than look in your wallet, if you have a wallet, or your pocket, and say, how much can I give to church? Start at the other end and remember, as Anton has mentioned, that it's all come from God, it all belongs to God in the first place. And then think about it and pray about it, and work out what your giving might be, whether it's to church or whether it's to missions. Try and do it at the beginning, and remind yourself it has all come from God. And I would really encourage you, if you've got a relatively regular income, it's just a lot easier to set up an automatic payment and say, this is the amount that I will give, set it up as an automatic EFT, and then it happens. Now, some people might think that's less sacrificial than working it out each time. I think it probably is more sacrificial because you're giving regularly from what you receive regularly. Now, if your income is irregular, that may not be a practical way forward. If it is regular, I think that there's a discipline in it being automatic. And whether you're working or on holidays or it's happening. And in my previous job here as administrator, first of all, banks nearly always say who's giving the money. So when money comes into church electronically, it nearly always says who the money's come from. Whether the person giving the money declares that or not, the bank declares that. And I was encouraged on a consistent basis by seeing regular giving from people just like yourselves. And sometimes there were amounts like $64.78, and then maybe 2 weeks later, $126.18. And I got a sense that that person was calculating from their income each fortnight how much they would give. Possibly they were giving a tenth of it, I don't know. But I got the distinct impression that there were many young adults who were giving quite sacrificially from their income. And I found that a very encouraging thing. And I would encourage you to do that, to think about it, to pray about it, and if it's a regular income, to just set it up automatically.
Anything else from the panel?
Just quickly, like when you, if you are earning, if you're only working a little bit and earning, say, $100 a week, to give, say, $10, $15 to church work and then other things to the poor or others, that's such a good discipline, because when you earn a full-time wage and you're earning much more than $100 a week, the number, the 10% number or the 15% number, or whatever number, percentage that you decide on, is much more, and you go, whoa, that's a lot of money to give away. So if you're in the discipline of doing it early on, that just helps with that mindset of going, okay, I'm going to keep deciding to be generous even though the numbers are going up.
I just wanted to jump in. I was super encouraged by Adam's little finance updates, and to see the difference between the one he gave earlier in the year and the most recent one, to see how many more people had been giving and how generous, especially like night church and the young adults, had been. So keep it up, guys. You guys are awesome.
So good.
Part of giving and being practical in giving is also being wise in the income and prayerfully deciding, because young adults are at that stage when you're studying, you're working out what you want to do for work, whether you go part-time, full-time, study full-time. Have you guys got any wisdom to share on things that the young adults can be thinking about in terms of a job and income?
I think reflecting back on my career and I guess looking at people who I went to school with, when I was in high school there was definitely a focus on women can do everything that men can do, which is totally true and still applies. But I think what struck me as I've progressed more in my career is that no one can have everything all at once. So even for people that choose to work full-time, that means there's less time to devote to family life, other things. So one thing that might be worth thinking about while you're studying and while you're considering sectors that you might work in ultimately is just having a think about is working part-time at some stages in your life something that you think may interest you. So it may not always be looking after children, it may not only be the females among us. There may be other reasons why working part-time makes sense. It might be volunteering, giving time to ministry, all those kind of things. So industry that I'm in the financial sector, it's probably less common for people to work part-time. Industries such as health and those kind of things probably lend themselves a little bit more to flexible working and those kind of things. But from what we've seen from COVID the last couple of years, flexible working is definitely here to stay, and it's definitely not the requirement for everyone to work full-time all the time. So yes, just reflecting back on my career has been really useful to think about, and I've been really lucky, as I said before, to be able to work part-time for a long time.
Any other wisdom? Anton, I imagine you've done a lot of ministry with young adults and seen a lot of people make decisions about work. Is there anything that you've seen which might be helpful?
There's always, you're never on the conveyor belt. Particularly nowadays, you don't need to, if you start going on in one direction, you can make different choices if God puts something on your heart, or if you go, this is actually going to lead me not to the place that where I want to go. So I could share my story. I'm going to share my wife's story. Katie started medicine and was wanting to be a doctor. But then she realised, actually, if the amount of work that it takes to be a doctor is massive and it's ongoing. And so she decided to change and ended up doing teaching because and it gave her a bit more flexibility this side of life. And so you can change depending on where your heart's at or what you're thinking. Also, I've got another friend who's a wife who did go down the medicine path and is juggling work and family fairly faithfully. So, it's all things are possible, but just keep going, okay, is what I'm doing leading to somewhere where I can contribute? Will the work be something that I can contribute to others as well as give financially in what I end up doing?
And I guess there's also that sense of, like, here at church, I think we have a lot of amazing people who have wrestled with work and serving God and trying to find a balance. Like, we have a God who does want to give us clarity about how we can serve best, whether it's working full-time, whether it's working part-time and doing ministry. So I'd have to say to you guys, if you're considering that and you want someone to chat to about that, there's a lot of older adults who can speak into that and be wise role models in that. So I'd encourage that. We've spoken a bit on looking at our spending and needing to look at our spending, like the idea of budgeting, monitoring. How do you do that as someone who goes from, paycheck to paycheck as a young adult? What does it look like to budget well, to monitor? Why do we do that?
I had some tips just from my limited experience, but my being in a similar life stage to a lot of you. The thing that I think has been said quite well tonight is that our money is from God. It's God's money. So we should be thinking about how we can be spending that faithfully. So my kind of top tips were to set aside your money for church first, as Graham mentioned before. Don't make it the last thing you think about, but it should be the first thing you're thinking about. The next kind of wise thing in my mind to think about is what you need to cover your essentials. So you've got your money for church, what you need to cover your essentials. I also think it is not a bad thing to be setting aside money to do something that you enjoy. So set aside money that is for your enjoyment, because God has blessed us and has given us this money to enjoy. So we shouldn't be feeling bad if we want to go out for lunch, or we want to go see a musical, or we want to go on a holiday. Doing that isn't a bad thing, but we have to make sure that our heart is in the right place when we're doing that. And yeah, the biggest tip that I can give you is just to be conscious of where your money goes. You do not need to sit down and calculate to a cent where your money has gone, but if you've got a rough idea, if you've got CommBank, their app has a really good little way that you can see how much money you're spending on different categories, and it kind of automatically does your categories for you. That can be a really good just way to glance and go, I've spent $1,000 on eating out this month. What was I doing? And that could be a way that you can then see, maybe that's where you can save some money to be, putting towards church. In saying that though, don't become so obsessed with your money that it becomes an idol in your life. Because it can be very easy to be so concerned and so worried about our money that it becomes the thing that is ruling our lives, and it's something that we can't stop thinking about. And that's a trap that you can very easily fall into. I've fallen into that trap before. So don't budget to a point where you're obsessed with your money. There is an element that we do need to make sure we're trusting God. That is a really big thing that we need to make sure we're doing. And don't be afraid to talk about money. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to share your struggles, but also don't be afraid to share your joys. I think we just need to be willing to be a little bit more open with our conversations, because I think that will be really helpful for everyone.
Anything else on budgeting?
I was never that good at budgeting, but my wife was. I would say that budgeting in a way can be summarised as living within your means and not spending any more than you earn. Because if you do spend more than you earn and you keep on doing that, then you'll get into strife. If you keep on having multiple credit cards or multiple buy now, pay later accounts, eventually it will catch up and it will end up badly in all cases. And Jen knows a lot more about that than I do. And if you want to spend no more than you earn, then you've got to keep some kind of track over how much you earn and how much you spend. So maybe it's not that hard to do. I reflected on this a little bit, and I think it's far more difficult for you now than it perhaps was for me when I was 20 or 25, because I don't think that I had nearly as many discretionary spending options as you probably have now. In terms of restaurants, in terms of eating out, in terms of subscriptions to streaming services and mobile phone devices, and constantly upgrading devices. I think life is more complicated, and I think perhaps you've got to be more careful and more diligent in monitoring all those relatively small amounts, which when you put them together become a really large amount of money that you can spend.
As an exercise, either use your bank's budgeting app or download. There's a million apps, app options for budgeting on your app store. Download one, and then just put in what you spend for a month, and just see what you spend your money on, just to give you an indication of, oh, okay, here's where I am spending money. Is this where I want to be spending my money in order to honour God? And so that might be a really good exercise to do. Do it for a month. Quickly on your point in terms of spend money on things that are enjoyable. Yeah, that's what 1 Timothy says. God provides for us things for our enjoyment. And so what's the response to that? Thankfulness. make sure, yes, spend some things on yourself for your enjoyment. Be thankful to God, remembering that He is the one who provides every good thing for us. So when you spend money on yourself, do it intentionally, thanking God. Don't feel guilty about it. Be generous, but when you spend yourself, give thanks to God.
I also think we can easily rush into budgeting and saving with like this, I don't know, it comes back to instant gratification, but we want it to happen instantly. We have a God who shows grace and mercy and gets that we're going to stuff up, and He doesn't expect things to happen in big steps instantly. So don't beat yourself up as well if you do make mistakes. Just remind yourself that God doesn't expect massive change all of a sudden. I'll move on to the topic of investing. Is it godly? I don't know, what do you do about investing? There's a lot of ways to invest. What do you invest in? Over to you.
Well, I'll start. I'll start, and I actually think that working towards home ownership is perhaps now one of the hardest ways to invest, and possibly still one of the best ways to invest. Hard because it's a huge amount of money, but many of you might think it's now an impossible thing to achieve. I suspect for many of you it's less impossible than you may think, but it probably requires a lot more discipline than you may wish to apply to the task in terms of saving up. But I'm very much of the view that there are benefits. Certainly there are huge benefits in retirement to being a homeowner, but there are huge benefits pre-retirement in being a homeowner rather than being a renter. So I think that if I was to rank all the different things in which you may invest, my personal opinion would be to put home ownership at the top of the list rather than perhaps shares or big superannuation balance or other things. Despite the difficulty of saving up, some of you might be able to hit up your parents for some money or a guarantee or something like that. Inevitably it will be, the home that you don't really want, it'll be much less than you want. It won't be where you want it to be, but there is some merit to it, and I think in some ways, for many people, it's a responsible way to manage their finance, or a responsible element in their financial planning.
I'm going to say there's wisdom in that, but certainly not the only way. And so investing, is it godly? So some people will say, like, if they invest in the stock market, it's gambling because you're kind of trying to get something for nothing. There is gambling where you, like, at a casino or lotto or something. That is literally getting something for nothing, and so that's not what God calls us to do with our money. But when you invest in, say, the stock market, what you're doing is you're allowing a company to use your funds to do something with their company, and they pay you in dividends or in a higher share price, hopefully. And so it's actually doing something. So that type of investing, whether it's in property or in shares or classic cars, it's not gambling. But the way God has set up the world is, if we use money wisely, then we might get a return on that. And so it is. So I think it is wise, rather than it is silly just to have your money in a bank account earning 0.5% interest or something. That's not, at that point the bank can use your money, but you're not getting much return for it. So as a Christian, I think it is okay to invest in something so that your money can help others do things with it, and you can get the benefit of that. Whether it's a house, whether it's shares, whether it's whether you just whether it's wiser to rent for all your life, that'll be up to your particular circumstance, and either any of those are okay, but think about, okay, what's going to help me provide for my family as well as continue to be generous.
Graham, you spoke on home ownership and that being a wise way to invest. What would you have to say to the idea of it tying you down? So you own a home. Does that shut you off from serving God elsewhere? This idea of, once I own a home, I can't leave that area.
I suppose to a certain extent it does, because moving home is expensive if it's the one that you own. It'll cost you a lot to move. So to some extent that is the case. Yes, you're probably less flexible than you would be if you were renting. If, however, it was a home that you were beginning to own, and I mean the bank is owning most of it for most of the time rather than you, if it was a home that you were not living in but renting out, then you may still have the benefit of gradual home ownership and the flexibility to be doing other things or living elsewhere or pursuing other opportunities.
Final big practical thing for us, taxes. I feel like a lot of people are starting to need to do tax and pay tax. Jen, you've seen people do it poorly, in fact, criminally wrongly, if that's how to phrase it. What are some things that we as like young adults who want to serve God well should know about tax?
Firstly, I'm definitely not a tax expert. I've seen people do the wrong thing in respect of not paying tax. I think it generally comes back down to honesty. So when doing our tax returns these days, a lot of what gets populated into your tax return is done automatically. So whatever your employer's paid you throughout the year tends to pop up in your tax return. There are minimal things, I guess, that we can be discretionary about. Some of those things are tax deductions and things like that, but it comes down to being honest, having the relevant documentation to back up what we're claiming. Other than that, I don't have any more specific advice around tax other than be truthful, be honest, pay the government what they're owed.
I'm also going to jump in and say, don't be afraid to ask for help when you're doing your tax, because it is confusing, it is terrifying. So don't be afraid to ask for help from someone who might know a bit more than you do. I'm going to put in a plug. It's not a Christian resource, but there is an awesome podcast called The Penny Drops. It's on wherever you find your podcasts, and they've done a lot of things on different finance, and it's been done in conjunction with a few banks. And it does have some really helpful things if you've got questions about like home ownership, taxes, that kind of stuff. It does go over a little bit about those. I've found that helpful in the past.
Remember when, after all the rain that we've had, there were so many potholes in the roads? Most of them have been filled by the government, paid for by our taxes. So paying taxes is a good thing, and so we should do it honestly. The government does give genuine deductions. So if it's a genuine deduction, the government's allowed you to do that. Feel free to minimise your tax where you can. But yes, definitely do not go beyond that with anything dishonest, like, oh, can I claim that? I can kind of claim that. Yeah. Make sure you can claim it, and make sure you pay your taxes because it's for the good of society. Even though we're cynical about government, they actually do good things some of the time.
I just want to chuck a really wholesome plug in there, and I'm going to throw Mel under the bus. Work that people do for government jobs, some of that can come out of taxpayer money. So Mel can take kids to the zoo because of your taxpayer money. So it does do good things. As much as you might hate paying it, it can fill potholes, it can take kids to the zoo. There are really cool things that your tax can do. So it's not all bad.
And Jesus was a tax expert. You remember when Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus with that question about paying dues to Caesar, and he got a coin and said, whose inscription is on the coin? His answer was, give to Caesar what's due to Caesar. And I think that's the implication for us is, pay what's due.
Well, I'd love to have answered more questions and covered more, but we are running out of time. The purpose of this seminar hasn't been to tell you everything you need to know, to answer all your questions, but we'd love this to be a springboard into you, maybe for the first time, reflecting on what God says about money for you and how that's going to impact you. Maybe it's a willingness to bring people on board and hold yourself accountable with what you do, with what God's given you. So keep the conversation going, keep the thoughts going and the prayer going with God as you wrestle with it. We're going to end with a few questions. The first question I find is quite a relevant one, and it says this: often vocational tertiary education is taught with an assumption that one wants to advance their income and career. As followers of Christ, how are we to approach the area of tertiary education?
I don't think education is ever a bad thing. Education is a very valuable thing, and it is something that we are really lucky to be able to have the opportunity to do. But in saying that, it's not something that is for everyone. It's not something that you might necessarily need to do. There are some jobs that you do need certain skill levels to do, and I wouldn't want to go to a doctor who had not been to medical school, and I wouldn't want to be taught by a teacher who hadn't had certain training to do that. So there are definitely professions where it is essential. But yeah, I don't think it is ever a bad thing to be educated. I think it comes back to how is it going to be helping you serve God in your job? Is your entire purpose of going and doing your master's degree to be able to earn more money in your job? If that is why, maybe that's not the best reason to be doing it. But if it is so you can do something new with your job, or it's so you can do something that will allow you to have more time to be generous with, or stuff like that. I think it's all about where your heart is. It's all about what God is telling you to do with that. But yeah, I'm a big fan of education. I think it is a really great blessing.
It comes down to the purpose of work. Why has God given us work to do, and what's the goal of it? Part of the goal is to earn money so that we can provide for our family, give to church, give to the needy, spend things for our enjoyment. Partly. The other part is doing things that will be good for others. So, Jen, your work, you are doing something that is good, that you're keeping, you're looking at for people who are doing the wrong thing, so that people can be, so that more people can do the right thing in their financial dealings. The reason why you do tertiary education is to do a job that will hopefully lead to doing good for society, helping other people, providing a service for people. If it's purely for money advancement, then you're in tertiary education for the wrong reasons, and you'll be pursuing the love of money. If you're going, okay, I'm wanting to do something in this, you may have a specific idea, you may not, and you go like, some vague direction, hopefully, so that I can get a job that will be useful in helping others. Now, you don't need a tertiary degree for that type of job, but you might have a particular job or particular field in mind where tertiary education is helpful or necessary. But it comes down to what work is for.
Anything to add, Graham? You look like you were itching there for a bit.
Well, the Bible certainly says that we should not pursue wealth and riches. Equally well, and I think it's somewhere in Proverbs, we should not pursue poverty. And so I think we should be careful in all the choices that we make, including financial choices and including choices about education. So God doesn't want us to be careless with any aspect of our life. And it may well be for some of us that we need to question whether we have the right or the appropriate level of skills or training or education to honour God in that, rather than dismiss the subject, a bit like dismissing the subject of finance. We shouldn't do it because we get confronted by finance every day of our lives, and you will be confronted with it throughout your life. So you do need to address it, and I think for young adults, a good thing to address is my education and my training. Is it appropriate? Am I seeking to honour God in what I'm doing? And it may well be that by being more trained or better educated that you earn a higher income, and by doing so you may well be able to have different ways in which you can serve God with that higher income that you're earning.
On that, Proverbs 10:4 says, lazy hands make for poverty. So God is not commending poverty or laziness. But diligent hands bring wealth. So if you work hard, study hard, wealth should come. That's a good thing if you then use your wealth for the glory of God.
A question, or a few questions have come in which are focusing on being careful, like this idea of how much should you care about the destination of your giving or the destination of your investing. So, for example, in this question, people say, I won't give directly to the homeless because I don't know what they'll do with it. Or I won't give to so-and-so charity because only a certain % of the money goes to the people intended. Or for investing, for example, like do we invest with Christian companies to know that they're going to be good stewards? The overall idea is, how much should we be careful and diligent about who we give to?
I think we should be very careful. If we're donating money, if that's the word to use, if it, for example, to a Christian organisation, we should be careful to endeavour to understand how well that money is being used. Are they good stewards of the money that's coming into them? Are they wasting it, for example, on administration expenses and nice weekends away at Hamilton Island, or are they forwarding most of what they receive to places of need? It may be hard to ascertain the answer to those questions, but it's worth thinking about it. And our partnership with Compassion was partly based on a level of confidence that Compassion was operating a very lean administrative base and sending as much as they possibly could to areas of need. When it comes to being a shareholder, I think that's also a valid question. What's the company that I'm investing in doing with my money? A good example recently was Woolworths, I think, is a great supermarket chain, but they also had a really big business in gambling through pub ownership. They've now got rid of the pub ownership part, partly because they thought it was tarnishing their reputation, and so they've hived it off. So it's a good question to ask, where is my money going, and is it being used for useful purposes or dangerous, harmful purposes?
Don't let asking questions, though, be something that stops you being generous. So ask those questions, be diligent with it, but don't use it as an excuse to not be giving. I want to touch on the homelessness point of that. There are lots of ways you can support people who are homeless. There are plenty of good charities that look after them. But if you see a homeless person on the street and you don't want to give them money, why don't you go up to them and ask, is there something you could buy for them? They might just need a meal and you could buy them a sandwich from the nearest place. There are other practical ways that we can give that aren't just money.
And final question. How do you approach spending money on something like a holiday in a good way?
What's the question again?
How do you approach spending money on something like a holiday in a good way? So I'm assuming it's coming from a place of, we're told, like as you said, Elise, we should be able to spend money on ourselves and on good things that we enjoy. But how do you balance that? How do you make sure it's coming from the right place, sort of thing?
As someone who is hopefully going on an overseas holiday this week, something that has gone into our planning is making sure that the money we're setting aside is not deducting from our usual giving. And it's a trip that we are going on to be thankful, and like I'm so thankful that we can go, hopefully. Don't feel guilty about wanting to go and enjoy the world, because God did create the world for us to enjoy, and God has created so many beautiful places and so many beautiful people that you could go and see and meet, and those are really good things. And I think, like Anton said before, it's not bad to spend money on yourself, but when you do it, be thankful. Be thanking God for the opportunity you've got. Be thanking God for, the blessing that it is that we can travel. After 2 years of COVID, like it is such a blessing that we can leave this state. I think doing it with a grateful and a thankful heart is a really important thing.
I think kind of what you said, make sure you've got your generosity in place first. So that I've heard people go, I can't give to church now because I'm saving up for this holiday. They may spend it on going out on a meal in the meantime, but so don't use the holiday as a reason not to be generous in other things. If you can afford to go on a holiday as well as being generous, then yes, all right, give thanks for that. Travel can be an idol though as well. Always wanting that new experience, always wanting that Instagram-worthy photo. So if it's just traveling for traveling's sake, then be wary of that. But holidays are also really good for rest and recovery and experiencing different people and different ways of life. So be thankful what travel brings. Be thankful if you can afford it. And if you can't afford it, or if you can't afford the travel that other people are doing, be content with that, knowing that you don't need travel to honour Jesus or to live. We will have picture the best place. If you had a ticket anywhere, where would you go? Picture that right now. That will be nothing compared to the wonder of the new creation when Jesus returns. So if you miss out on all the travel, any of the travel, you won't miss out if you keep trusting Jesus, be content in him, because he's got a wonderful place for us to travel to when he returns.
Well, what a great reminder to end. That's all we've got time for tonight. The panel are still going to be available if you want to ask them any quick questions. But also feel free to send stuff through to them if it comes up later on. We've heard a lot tonight. There's a lot to process. We have a God who wants to help us make these decisions and process all that we've heard. So let me ask him that he would help us do that. So let's pray to wrap up. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for this panel and the wisdom they've brought. And thank you so much for the reminder of the God that you are. God, you are a generous God. You are committed to us for our good. And how we approach money and wealth is part of that. You know the dangers of it. You know the joys of it. So God, help us all walk away from tonight being reminded, most importantly, of the generous God that you are, but also help us process all that we've heard. We want to be people that serve you faithfully. So I pray that you'd put on our heart what we need, that you might challenge us, you might encourage us around a certain thing, God. We want to serve you well. Help us do that. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, feel free to keep sticking around and chatting. If you can help pack up, that would be amazing. Just chairs to the side. But it's been great to have you guys here tonight. We hope it's helped you start thinking about money maybe for the first time in terms of what God says. I'd encourage you to keep the conversations going. Keep raising it in Bible study and in your interactions you have with each other. See you guys on Sunday.